What happens to a nuclear empire when the only man holding it together suddenly disappears? Right now, deep inside the walls of the Kremlin, the most dangerous people on Earth are quietly preparing for the exact moment Vladimir Putin's heart stops beating. If you want to understand the secret power games deciding the fate of our world, hit that subscribe button, leave a quick like, and share this video with someone who loves deep dives. History has a strange way of repeating itself, especially in places where the rules are written in pencil and erased in blood. Whenever a long-ruling leader in a highly centralized system begins to show the inevitable signs of time, a very specific type of silence falls over the capital. It is not a peaceful silence. It is the silence of predators, calculating their next move. The global public is currently distracted by the daily movements on the battlefield in Eastern Europe, watching lines on a map shift by a few miles here and there. But the real war, the one that will actually determine the future of the largest country on Earth, is not being fought in the trenches. It is being fought in the sleek, heavily guarded offices of Moscow. It is a war of whispers, of hidden bank accounts, of private armies, and of sudden, unexplained arrests. To understand why this is happening right now, you have to understand the fundamental flaw in how power operates in modern Russia. In a traditional monarchy, the king eventually dies, but the system survives because everyone knows exactly who the next king will be. The rules of succession are carved in stone. The crown prince has been preparing for the role his entire life. The elite families have no reason to panic or turn on each other because the future is predictable. Predictability is the ultimate currency of stability. Even in the darkest days of the Soviet Union, there was a machine in place to handle the transfer of power. The Politburo, a council of top communist officials, functioned as a board of directors. When a Soviet leader died, the board would meet, negotiate behind closed doors, and eventually emerge with a new leader. It was brutal, and it was secretive, but it was a system. It was an institution that was bigger than any single man. Over the last quarter of a century, the current leadership in Moscow has systematically dismantled every single institution that could possibly challenge its authority. There is no Politburo. There is no genuine ruling party with independent political weight. There's no independent judiciary. There's no legitimate mechanism for transferring power. The entire architecture of the Russian state has been redesigned to balance on the shoulders of one individual. Power does not flow through official government titles. It flows through personal relationships, through shared histories, through unwritten debts, and through absolute unquestioning loyalty. The system is essentially a massive, highly complex web of personal favors, and there is only one man who knows how all the threads connect. But you cannot hand a web of personal relationships down to a successor. Loyalty to a specific individual cannot be inherited. The moment the central figure is removed, the entire web instantly loses its structural integrity. Every promise made, every protection granted, every fortune secured by a personal handshake becomes completely meaningless overnight. And the people at the top of this system know this better than anyone. They are not politicians in the traditional sense. They are managers of vast empires of wealth and force, waiting for instructions from the top. When those instructions stop coming, nobody else has the authority to issue them. This creates a terrifying paradox. The very things that make the leader totally secure today are the exact things that guarantee total chaos tomorrow. If he were to officially name a successor right now, he would immediately make himself irrelevant. The moment an heir is named, the powerful clans would stop looking at the sitting ruler and start currying favor with the future ruler. The sitting leader would become a lame duck, vulnerable and weak. Therefore, for his own survival, he cannot allow anyone to look like a legitimate successor. He must keep everyone guessing. He must keep the clans competing against each other, divided, and dependent entirely on him to referee their disputes. This brilliant strategy for daily survival is a recipe for a catastrophic succession crisis. Because the rules cannot choose the next leader, something else will have to. In the history of this part of the world, that something else has almost always involved men carrying weapons. The elite factions in Moscow have realized that the clock is ticking. They are no longer waiting for a smooth transition. They are actively arming themselves, hoarding resources and neutralizing their rivals while the central authority is distracted by external conflicts. Let us open the dossiers on the actual players in this shadow war. The first faction is one that was never designed to fight a foreign enemy. They are the ultimate insurance policy, built for the single purpose of protecting the throne from internal threats. This is the faction of the bodyguards, and they control the most fearsome domestic army on the continent. Their leader is a man who has stood in the shadows for decades, watching, listening, and remembering. He's a veteran of the criminal underworld of the 1990s, a man who earned a reputation for absolute ruthlessness and unquestioning loyalty. For 35 years, his only job has been to keep one man alive and in power. Before we uncover how this bodyguard built a personal army capable of taking over the country, take a quick second to support this channel. Make sure you are subscribed, drop a like on this video, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement is the only way we can keep bringing you these massive, unfiltered deep dives. Now, let's look at the guns pointing directly at Moscow. The loyalty of this chief bodyguard was rewarded with the creation of the National Guard, a massive internal security force that answers only to the very top. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of heavily armed troops. They were carved out of the regular Interior Ministry several years ago and deliberately kept completely separate from the regular military's chain of command. Why do you need an army this large that is not allowed to fight on foreign soil? Because their battlefield is the capital city itself. They exist to crush protests, to put down rebellions, and most importantly, to deter any other faction from attempting a coup. Recently, this internal army was handed a massive upgrade. Following a brief and terrifying mutiny by a private mercenary group, the central government panicked. To ensure the capital would never be threatened by rogue columns of armor again, they signed decrees transferring heavy weaponry, including tanks and artillery, directly to the National Guard. Think about the implications of that move. Hundreds of thousands of troops now equipped with heavy armor, stationed precisely where political power is decided. They are not suffering casualties on the front lines. They are sitting comfortably, fully equipped and waiting. But sheer firepower is only one half of this faction's strength. The other half is strategic positioning. There is a younger figure in this group, a man in his early 50s, who spent 15 years standing directly behind the supreme leader. He was the personal shadow. He was the one who allegedly protected the leader from a wild bear during a wilderness retreat. He was the one who commanded special operations during the most sensitive covert military actions of the last decade. He was eventually sent to govern a vital region to gain political experience, only to be brought back to the capital recently and handed crucial portfolios, including the defense industry and the state council. This specific promotion is what has every analyst in the intelligence community holding their breath. The state council used to be a ceremonial body, a place for governors to sit and nod, but recently it was officially written into the Constitution with expanded, vague powers. Many experts believe this was the creation of a massive exit hatch. It looks incredibly like a pre-built mechanism designed to allow the supreme leader to step away from daily management while still controlling the country from a specialized chairman's seat. By putting his most trusted former bodyguard in charge of this specific council, the leader has given this faction something far more valuable than tanks. He has given them the bureaucratic machinery of succession. This faction has agents deeply embedded in every corner of the security apparatus. They run the Federal Protective Service, meaning they control the physical access to the leader, the security of the Kremlin buildings, and the encrypted communications networks. They have men running the personnel commissions that approve or deny the promotion of every single senior police and intelligence officer in the country. They do not just have the guns, they have the files. They decide who gets promoted, who gets close to the center, and who gets pushed out into the cold. However, brute force and access can only take you so far if you do not have the intellectual and financial machinery to actually run a modern state. This brings us to the second major faction in this succession war, a group so powerful and so deeply embedded in the economy that they do not even need to carry weapons. They are the ideological architects of the current regime. They are the personal bankers. They are the media barons. If the bodyguards are the muscle, this family is the brain and the wallet. At the center of this group is a man in his 70s who spent more time in absolute isolation with the leader during the global health crisis than almost anyone else on the planet. During those endless months of quarantine, sitting at long tables, this man fed the leader a very specific vision of the world, a vision rooted in historical grievances, imperial destiny, and an eternal, existential struggle against the outside world. When historians eventually write the story of why the regime shifted from corrupt pragmatism to messianic warfare, they will point directly at this man. The financial power of this clan is staggering. They control the bank that handles the personal wealth of the inner circle. They control vast insurance empires. More importantly, they control the national media group. They dictate what millions of citizens see on their television screens every single night. They control the narrative. In a crisis, the ability to broadcast your version of the truth to the masses is just as critical as controlling the streets. They also have their hands firmly on the levers of domestic politics. Their allies manage the internal policy of the administration, orchestrating elections, appointing regional governors, and controlling the country's largest social media networks. We are only halfway through the players on this board, and the tension is already suffocating. If you are fascinated by how real power operates behind closed doors, take a moment right now to hit that subscribe button with notifications turned on. Drop a like to help the algorithm push this deep dive to other curious minds, and let's dive into the most dangerous weapon this financial clan possesses. This clan of bankers and ideologues recently made two strategic moves that elevated them from wealthy insiders to potential kingmakers. They managed to place one of their sons in charge of the state's chief auditing agency. This agency has the ultimate authority to inspect the finances of any government official, any ministry, and any state-owned corporation. Shortly after, they helped install a loyal ally as the prosecutor general of the entire country. Look at the terrifying synergy of those two appointments. In a system where everyone is guilty of something, where every fortune was built on stolen state assets, corruption is not a crime. Corruption is the glue that holds the system together. But it also means that everyone is permanently vulnerable. The auditing agency has the power to suddenly discover financial irregularities. The prosecutor's office has the power to turn those irregularities into 20-year prison sentences. They have built a perfectly legal, completely silent execution machine. If a rival clan starts getting too ambitious, they do not need to send armed men in the middle of the night. They just send the accountants. An audit is launched. Millions in missing funds are miraculously found. The prosecutor signs a warrant, and the rival's career, freedom, and fortune vanish instantly. This is the modern art of bureaucratic warfare. The bodyguards have the armor, but the bankers have the spreadsheets. And in this environment, the spreadsheet is often the deadlier weapon. Normally, the referee between the men with the guns and the men with the money would be the secret police. The domestic intelligence service is supposed to be the all-seeing eye that keeps every faction in check. But the intelligence apparatus is currently tearing itself apart from the inside. The legendary spy agency that has terrified the population for decades is suffering from exhaustion, internal paranoia, and a catastrophic string of professional failures. The man who has run the main intelligence directorate for over 15 years is fading from the scene, reportedly spending more time seeking medical treatment than managing his spies. The day-to-day operations have fallen to ambitious deputies, who are constantly maneuvering against each other. The intelligence community is currently locked in a desperate battle to deflect the blame for the disastrous miscalculations of the recent foreign wars. When a war goes badly, the military blames the spies for providing bad information, and the spies blame the military for being incompetent. This toxic blame game has reached the highest levels. Secret reports continually leak to the outside world, detailing how senior security officials are viciously turning on one another. Officers from competing directorates are building criminal cases against each other. The faction that was supposed to be the ultimate arbiter of power is now just another street gang fighting for survival. And as they fight amongst themselves, the fear that has frozen the elite for 2 decades is beginning to melt. When the secret police are busy investigating each other, the rest of the elite realizes that the all-seeing eye is temporarily blind. You might be asking yourself at this point, where is the regular army in all of this? In most countries with unstable governments, the military is the ultimate decider. The generals roll the tanks up to the presidential palace, declare martial law, and take over. But the supreme leader in Moscow is a student of history. He has spent 25 years obsessively coup-proofing his regime. He knows that the greatest threat to a dictator is never the enemy across the border. It is the general across the hall. To ensure the military can never threaten his rule, he has systematically divided its power. He recently appointed a civilian economist as the Minister of Defense. This man has no military background, no loyalty from the troops, and no ability to command. A combat division. His only job is to audit the colossal war budgets and squeeze efficiency out of the defense industry. The combat generals absolutely despise him. And that is exactly why he was appointed. Because the generals hate the defense minister, they will never unite behind him to launch a rebellion. The actual combat operations are run by aging, exhausted commanders who are deliberately kept away from political power. The special operations and sabotage units are run by a completely separate military intelligence wing. The money, the strategy, and the covert operations are held by 3 different people who do not trust each other. The military has been deliberately fractured. Furthermore, the army is currently bleeding out on a foreign battlefield. They are taking horrific casualties every single month, burning through their equipment and exhausting their officer corps. An army that is bogged down in a brutal, grinding war of attrition 1,000 miles away is an army that cannot march on its own capital. The leader has successfully neutralized the military as a political threat. He has also completely sidelined the technocrats, the brilliant economists who run the central bank and the finance ministries, the people who have miraculously kept the country's economy from collapsing under the weight of historic global sanctions, have zero political power. In a normal society, the people who keep the money flowing are the most powerful people in the room. But in a personalist autocracy, competence without the ability to inflict violence is just middle management. When the succession war finally erupts, the brilliant economists will simply go to work for whoever wins the shootout. Because the military is occupied and the intelligence services are fractured, the opening phase of this succession war is not being fought with bullets. It is being fought with property. The size of the economic pie is rapidly shrinking due to the war, the sanctions, and the demographic collapse. The elites are used to a certain lifestyle, a certain level of massive, unchecked wealth. Because they can no longer expand their wealth outward, they have turned inward. They have started cannibalizing each other. Over the last 2 years, an unprecedented wave of asset seizures has swept across the country. The state has aggressively nationalized massive private companies, agricultural empires, major transportation hubs, gold producers, and heavy manufacturing plants have all been ripped from the hands of their billionaire owners. This is not a socialisto revolution. This is a mafia redistribution. We are entering the final act of this incredible story, and things are about to get even darker. If you appreciate the massive amount of research and storytelling that goes into producing these videos, please take a second to hit subscribe, click the like button, and leave a comment below. Your support is the foundation of this channel. Let's look at the terrifying consequences of this economic cannibalism. The official explanation for these seizures is always some vague violation of privatization laws from the 1990s or sudden accusations of funding foreign enemies. But the reality is that the strongest clans are using the crisis to steal the assets of the weaker clans. The old rules of the game, where the central leader guaranteed the property rights of the loyal oligarchs, have completely collapsed. Loyalty is no longer enough to protect your wealth. The only thing that protects your wealth today is your ability to destroy anyone who tries to take it. The intelligence factions are creating specialized units to audit the defense budgets, allowing them to seize control of lucrative supply chains. The old guard from the state-owned defense conglomerates are swallowing up independent manufacturing plants. Even the bodyguards are getting in on the action, using their influence to steer massive retail and distribution networks into the hands of their own relatives. Every single player on the board is frantically converting their temporary political proximity into hard, physical assets, while they still can. They are hoarding resources because they know that when the central pillar collapses, money will be the only thing that can buy them an army. And speaking of armies, we cannot ignore the wildcards. While the state military is fractured, private wealth is increasingly being converted into private force. Ultra-nationalist billionaires, driven by a toxic mix of religious extremism and imperial nostalgia, have spent years bankrolling vast constellations of volunteer battalions and private armed formations. They have their own money. They have heavily armed men who are loyal to their paychecks, and they have deep connections to the most radical elements of the state, church, and the intelligence services. These private actors learned a very specific lesson from the brief mercenary mutiny that shook the world. When that rogue mercenary commander ordered his heavily armed convoy to drive toward Moscow, the most shocking thing was not that he did it. The most shocking thing was how easy it was. The world watched in stunned disbelief as the mercenary column rolled down the main highway toward the capital, facing almost zero resistance from the regular military or the local police. The state looked incredibly fragile. The illusion of absolute, total control was shattered in a single afternoon. But the elites also learned the second half of that lesson. 2 months after the mutiny, the private plane carrying the mercenary commander miraculously fell out of the sky. The message was clear. The state might be slow to react, but its vengeance is absolute and terrifying. This dual lesson has created a suffocating standoff. Everyone knows the system is brittle and vulnerable to a sudden, violent shock. But everyone is also terrified of being the first one to move, knowing that if they fail, they will not just lose their jobs, they will lose their lives. This paranoia is bleeding into the political machinery. The upcoming parliamentary elections are turning into a vicious, silent war between the domestic political managers and the secret police. You might wonder why anyone in a dictatorship cares about rigged elections. They care because the rigging itself is a display of power. Controlling who gets to sit in the fake parliament means controlling the legal machinery that will be used to legitimize the next leader. When the supreme leader falls, whoever controls the rubber stamp parliament gets to stamp their own name on the crown. The regime is so terrified of losing control of this narrative that they are turning the internet into a prison. They are throttling mobile networks, attempting to block mass messaging platforms, and plunging entire regions into digital darkness to prevent the coordination of any independent thought. But the most revealing sign of systemic panic is who they are arresting. The secret police are no longer just hunting democratic activists or anti-war dissidents. They are starting to arrest the regime's own former cheerleaders, pro-government bloggers and nationalist politicians who supported the war but criticized the leadership's competence are being thrown into prison. When a regime starts devouring its own most rabid supporters, it is a sign that the system is checking every lock twice, because it no longer trusts the people holding the keys. At the center of this swirling vortex of paranoia, cannibalism, and silent warfare sits the architect of it all. He sees exactly what is happening. He knows that his system is eating itself, but he cannot fix it without destroying himself. If he names an heir, he becomes irrelevant. If he creates a strong, independent institution to manage the transition, that institution will eventually realize it doesn't need him anymore. His only rational move is to pretend that the problem does not exist. This has led to a bizarre, almost medieval obsession with longevity. There are widespread, credible reports of massive state-funded projects focused on advanced gene therapy, organ replacement, and experimental anti-aging treatments. It sounds like science fiction, but it is the oldest story in human history. The first emperor of a unified China conquered the known world, built a system entirely around his own terrifying persona, and then spent his final years desperately drinking toxic elixirs, hunting for the secret of immortality. His empire collapsed into civil war almost immediately after. His death. The modern ruler in Moscow is trapped in the exact same psychological prison. He has just swapped out the ancient elixirs for modern biotech. Every single powerful person in the capital shares one overriding, desperate interest with the supreme leader. They all want to delay the reckoning. The bodyguards want more time to stockpile weapons. The bankers want more time to seize assets. The spies want more time to purge their rivals. The entire social contract of the current Russian elite is based on keeping the central figure breathing for just one more day, while secretly preparing for the day he stops. So, how does this end? Predicting the immediate collapse of this regime has been a fool's errand for 2 decades. The system is incredibly resilient, bound together by mutual complicity and the terrifying knowledge that if the ship sinks, they all drown together. The risk of moving against the center is astronomical, and the chaos it would unleash could destroy the very wealth they are trying to protect. Therefore, the most logical, safest move for every single clan is to maintain absolute public loyalty while quietly sharpening their knives in the dark. But autocracies always look completely immortal right up until the exact Tuesday afternoon when they suddenly collapse. The pressure is building beneath the surface, and the cracks are getting wider. Because this is a personalist system, you will not see the end coming by watching the front lines of the foreign war, and you will not see it by watching the economic indicators. The signals of the endgame will come from the palace itself. There are 5 critical things you must watch. First, watch the internal army. If those hundreds of thousands of heavily armed guards suddenly change their deployment patterns around Moscow, the game has begun. Second, watch the prosecutors. When high-level indictments start dropping against untouchable billionaires, it is not an anti-corruption drive. It is an opening artillery barrage in a clan war. Third, watch the political machinery during the upcoming elections. Any disruption in the smooth, predetermined outcome means the elite factions are openly fighting for the steering wheel. Fourth, watch the obscure bureaucratic councils. If a ceremonial body suddenly receives massive new constitutional powers, the exit mechanism is being assembled. And finally, watch the physical presence of the leader himself. In a system built entirely around one man, his daily schedule is the heartbeat of the nation. Every clan in the capital analyzes his public appearances the way a desperate family watches a heart monitor in a hospital room. When the appearances thin out, when the meetings are delayed, when the silence stretches just a little too long, the ultimate panic will set in. The succession. War in Russia has already begun. It is happening right now, in the shadows, obscured by the smoke of foreign battlefields and the noise of global propaganda. It is a war of position, of asset hoarding, and of silent bureaucratic executions. The decisive variable for the future of the continent is not the price of oil, and it is not the expansion of foreign military alliances. It is the physical authority of a single aging man. He is the only load-bearing pillar left in a massive, decaying structure. Every empire in history that tied its entire existence to the heartbeat of one man has ended in exactly the same way. The end does not truly begin when the leader finally falls. The end begins when the men standing behind him realize that he is mortal, and they start planning for the morning after. In Moscow, that planning is no longer a secret. The weapons are loaded, the files are open, and the predators are circling. If the absolute center of gravity vanished from the Kremlin tomorrow morning, who do you think would win the first 48 hours of chaos? Would it be the faction with the hundreds of thousands of armored troops? Or would it be the shadowy family that controls the banks, the television stations, and the prosecutors? Drop your deepest analysis in the comments below, because we read every single one. If this breakdown changed the way you look at global power, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel so you never miss a move on the geopolitical chessboard, and we will see you next time as we uncover the secrets they don't want you to know.